19 investigates with breaking new developments on a decades-old serial murder case here in Cleveland.
It's been one of Northeast Ohio's biggest mysteries for nearly 90 years.
Who was the torso killer and who were his unidentified victims?
In an exclusive interview, investigator Sarah Goldenberg found we may be one step closer to finding out some of those answers.
We've learned a nonprofit is working with the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office to try to identify some of the victims of the torso killer using DNA and genealogy.
They're one of Northeast Ohio's most notorious unsolved crimes. Who was the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run? And more importantly, who were this vicious killer's victims? In the mid to late 1930s, horrifying discoveries across the city of Cleveland. Over 4 years, someone murdered and dismembered more than a dozen people, dumping them across the city's east side. Many times, only a torso was recovered.
At this time, this is in the middle of the Great Depression. There are a lot of transient, people moving around the country, high unemployment.
According to police, Edward Andersey and Florence Polillo were the only victims who could be positively identified through their fingerprints. Another woman, Rose Wallace, was tentatively ID'd from dental records. But for nearly 90 years, the identities of the torso killer's other victims have remained a mystery, buried here in unmarked graves in a potter's field.
So this is an article that Dr. Gerber wrote. They mentioned Elliot Ness.
Dr. Thomas Gilson is the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner. In an exclusive interview, he told 19 Investigates the DNA Doe Project reached out to them. And together, they're trying to identify anywhere between 1 and 3 victims of the torso killer. First, they'll need to exhume their bodies and try to generate DNA profiles. Then the DNA Doe Project will step in, trying to identify the victims with investigative genetic genealogy by finding a common ancestor.
In this case, what we're going to try to do is look forward in time. So if I have a profile of somebody, can I find people who have ancestral DNA that's similar to this person, and then potentially find relatives of these folks and try to connect them? Very, very novel approach.
The big challenge will be what comes first, finding the victims' bodies and seeing what shape they're in.
The exhumation is going to be tricky, though, because these are people, again, who are living on the periphery of society. They're buried in a potter's field. We're dealing with records that, are 90 years old. And, I think as much as people would like to think this is a very systematic, orderly process, it isn't.
Will it finally be enough to identify some of these victims and even help solve this decades-old mystery?
Can we finally, get an answer on it? I think that's the exciting potential of it. But I think even if we came away knowing who some of these folks were, that would be, a win for me.
The DNA Doe Project is funding the investigation into these victims' identities. Right now, they have no timeline on how long this could take. Sarah Goldenberg, 19 News.